Good afternoon. My name is Sam Champong. I'm the regional head for CIPS MENA, which is the Middle East and North Africa office of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Welcome to today's webinar, which is supported by Qatar Development Bank, QDB, and I'd like to thank them for their support. The subject of today's session is procuring IT services, and we're very grateful to have James Bennett from iXserve to present the session. If you do have any questions at all as we go through the session, please type them in the Q&A box below. You can also use the chat box if you want to interact with each other as we go through. We will allow plenty of time to answer all of your questions at the end. So now, without further delay, I'll hand you over to James. James, over to you.
Sam, thank you very much. If I can just check that you can see me nice and clearly.
We can indeed.
Wonderful. So thank you, Sam. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name is James Bennett. I'm Chief Revenue Officer of iServe. And just a brief bit of context. iServe is a business providing technology to progressive businesses of many different sizes, but especially mid-sized businesses in the area of people, a platform that provides something to enhance the experience of employees and managers in the workforce, a platform to enhance their productivity and also ensure compliance. But that's enough of that, because as you can probably gather, I come at this from the sales side. I've bought a lot of technology myself, but to a large extent, I'm acting as gamekeeper turned poacher or poacher turned gamekeeper, whichever way you like to think of it. So therefore, what I would like to share with you is some of the perspectives of the work that I've been involved in over the last 30 years, specifically buying and selling technology. Comes in a range of different sizes and capabilities. There's, in terms of technology, there's infrastructure, there's software. My own personal area of expertise has been in the software side of it. So there's a significant amount of this which is geared to that. And of course, there's a lot of, when people talk about buying technology, a lot of what is bought is indeed the software. And there are some slightly different perspectives when one comes at buying technology from the way I have. And that's a lot of what I wanted to share with you. We'll go into these three particular areas in a little more detail. The first is some of the very earliest mistakes that I see buyers make in terms of effectively their buying cycle, the stages that many people go through in buying technology. The second is the nature of the relationship that often gets established between buyers and sellers. And the third is a few insights on some things I hope that you can do. Certainly what I would suggest to ensure that you get the most from the interaction and the engagement you have with those from whom you buy. But first, and this is perhaps a little strange to come from a technologist, it's absolutely not all about the tech. It can be all-consuming when one believes that one has the need for technology, to get into the technology, to get into the weeds of the technology and start comparing different suppliers with different bits and pieces of functions and features and so forth. But of course, really all the technology is doing is bringing about processes and information that is going to both value people and will enable people to do things. And in all of these years that I've been involved, it's very well known that 80%, it's been well documented by very big companies like McKinsey or Accenture or people like that, that somewhere around 80% of technology transformations, as it gets referred to, but at least technology projects, 80% of them fail. And that's probably because not enough attention is paid to the people side of the technology, the use of the technology, the understanding of the people in a business in making use of those technology, and most specifically, making changes in their day-to-day work to make use of it. understanding the processes that are involved and the information that comes out. So before we even get started, I would urge, if you're not familiar with it, but certainly urge you to pay close attention to the change that you're going to be asking people to exercise as a result of bringing technology in the first place. Because we could get a great deal with the technology. We could do a great implementation, set up, whatever it might be of the technology. But unless the rest of the people who are going to be involved in it, in the business, are brought along on that journey, we're not going to see the kind of time to value or the return on investment that's needed. But as I promised, coming back first of all to the fundamentals right at the beginning of buying technology. Who wants it? Who needs it? And precisely why? Very often I've been called in to talk to businesses who want to buy often human capital management or ERP or office technology. And the biggest notable gap right from the start is when I ask them, so what's changed? Why do you need to change? What's wrong with the current situation? What sparked this desire to go buy technology? And then we get into what's really needed, what's wanted, what's needed, and what the options are. Because, strange as it may be for me to say it, technology isn't always the answer. And certainly technology is not all of the answer. Even where technology is needed, it's only part of the answer. And I would re-emphasize what I started with, which is don't forget the processes and don't forget the people. But this is a phase where sometimes, because of the internet, we can get slightly carried away with the notion that we can do loads of internet research. Now, if you are very familiar with the area in which you are researching and looking for a selection of a partner to work with in a particular area of technology, if you're very familiar with it, you'll be very well informed. But really at this point, I would advise that you just consider this as options. Don't get too ahead in thinking that you're coming up with answers and solutions, because there is a lot that you can get from suppliers to formulate those solutions. So the next phase in this is obviously going to be to identify the suppliers and start evaluating the different options that you have with them. And I would say, and I'll come on to this in a little bit more in a moment, keep an open mind. It can be very tempting at one of these early stages to think, oh, we found it. You may well have, but stay as open-minded for as long as possible until you're getting into real conversations with the suppliers, where you can resolve what is effectively a set of challenges that you need to resolve. At that point, typically you'll be selecting, and then of course comes the next stage of justifying and ensuring that everyone who requires sign off is able to sign off. And of course, whilst there is this overall cycle going on, individuals will be going in their own particular cycle. So, I've been in many circumstances where there is a function, it might be finance, it might be HR, it might be distribution, might be logistics, whatever it might be, where that organization is absolutely sure that it needs some technology, needs to go through a change. But those who are going to sign it off are way behind the curve. They might have kicked it off, but there's a lot has happened during this process, and they'll be behind the curve when we go back and ask them to sign it off. So to a large extent, in this justification and kind of commit stage, I've seen there needs to be a lot of work put into developing business cases, finer details of business cases, identifying the return on the investment, being really clear about what this technology introduction is going to mean, what the change program needs to mean. Because in situations where I've sat on boards and I've been asked to buy technology, yes, of course, the cost of it is essential. But equally, the time and the amount of change that it's going to mean for the business is important as well, and where that timing slots into the business cycle. So these are things that, in fact, we can start doing early on in the whole process by making sure those key stakeholders, those sign-off authorities are aware of what's happening and are kept up to speed. So at the point of asking them to finally sign off the budget or sign off the contract, they're more up to speed and we don't have delays. Then, of course, the implementation, that should be clearly identified early on in the cycle, but always with a mind, right from the earliest point, always a mind on how we want to measure the return on our investment. What are those key performance indicators? If we can identify them right at the start, let's do it, because that ultimately is going to bring about the value of buying the technology. So what can suppliers, vendors do in the equation? I think it's quite common in the technology world for suppliers or vendors to talk about being partners. But what does it mean really? I would suggest that it is it's equally up to you on the value you get from your suppliers in the way you approach them, as it is on the suppliers and the way they approach it with you. If you go into it with a view that I'm clear on what I need, they're just going to supply it, I'm just going to get it at the best price, and they just supply, then that might be absolutely fine for consumables. But for more sophisticated, complex projects, that is likely to lead to a pretty rocky road during the course of an implementation, because there won't be the relationship. There won't necessarily be that respected relationship. So as I'll touch on in a moment, my advice, my counsel would be to share as much as you reasonably can with your suppliers about where the business is going, where the objectives are, the broader context of yourselves and your businesses, and get them to open up what options they have. Now, sure, you're going to come across a load of salespeople who will have a little more in their minds than signing deals and signing commission checks. And where that's the case, I would say try and get in behind the salespeople to meet and get to know the people who are going to be delivering. Because I've been a salesperson all my life, and I know full well that the real value doesn't really come from me in a sales situation. It comes from those who are going to be resourcing the projects in partnership with our clients to get the job done. My job is primarily a way of making sure that as a business, we understand enough of what needs to be achieved and how to go about achieving it with clients. So if you can go to your suppliers and your vendors thinking, I'm going to get the best from them, not necessarily just on price, but on relationship, ideas, innovation, then that, I would suggest, is going to make for a richer, more fulfilling relationship in the long term. It also means that you'll be able to go into projects with a much clearer idea. That's going to save an enormous amount of time, and as we all know, time is money, regardless of the amount that you actually spend out to the supplier for the contract. And then where that open-mindedness comes in, I would introduce you to something I've used for many years, which is aspirin. This then is sharing with those suppliers your aspiration. What do you want to achieve? Not necessarily how you want to achieve it, but what you want to achieve. The next thing is to do your own research and being really clear on what the current situation, what the current state is. Many a time I've started talking to buyers, to businesses, and in all honesty, they're not clear enough on what they want to achieve. There are not really clear key performance indicators. There aren't really clear critical success factors. There aren't clear measures. I end up spending quite a lot of time working with them to really hone down what they want to achieve and what they aspire to, and then the current situation. What is it really? Because this is the point, of course, from which we want to, as a vendor, we want to help our clients move. If we don't understand the start point, it's going to be very difficult to achieve that end point. So I would urge you, please, to be really clear about what the current situation is in the context of whatever technology you want to achieve, and really drill into it and look at all the moving parts. And then from that, do some analysis on yourselves. Talk to the people in the business on what the real problems, what the real pains, what the real challenges are. Different people, of course, will have different perspectives on this. And the resolution of those problems and the resolution of those pains ultimately will lead to clearing a whole load of risks, frustrations from the current situation. And that will, of course, then bring its rewards. But many businesses, understandably, because it can be a lot of hard work, but this groundwork preparation that you do with yourselves and then willingly and openly sharing with your short list of aspiring vendors will pay dividends in them understanding you, you understanding them, you then being able to take ideas, innovation, and options from them that can craft a really effective solution that can effectively be implemented. And then there is a bit that many people often forget, which is a reality check of, do the wheels really fall off if we don't do this? This kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier on, which is, technology has a place. Not everything's going to be fixed by technology, and technology alone won't fix anything. So the implication of doing nothing, the implication of taking no action, if it doesn't come up at this stage, certainly when I've been asked to sign off technology purchases, one of my first questions is, what happens if we do nothing? So it's important to understand what the implications are of doing nothing and pull all of that then together into clarity on what is really needed and really wanted, the difference between the two, what's absolutely needed to alleviate risk, to achieve the aspirations, what needs to be fixed, and then while we're going on this, what would we like to fix, and what other rewards can we get from doing it? So those are the three areas I wanted to share with you. Work right at the beginning to consider to consider who is in your business with regards to the stages of thinking that we all go through the buying cycle. I certainly didn't invent it. I think Huthwaite did, but it can be used to great effect. An open-mindedness and open discussion with your shortlisted vendors or suppliers, and then some good, honest, hard work right at the beginning to inspect your aspirations, your situation, the real problems, the real risks, the implications of doing nothing, and thereby get to the point of clarity on both what you need and what you want. With all of that, you'll get the best relationship, and with the best relationship will come the best price and the best deal, not just in the short term, but in the long term with your suppliers and vendors. That is my observation from a lot of the time, the other side of the fence, but also having been on your side of the fence plenty of times too. With that, I'll hand back to Sam.
Great, fantastic. Thanks very much for that, James. Really interesting. Buying IT services is the topic at the moment. So thanks for giving your perspective. Very, very useful. I'm just going to continue. I mean, we got the questions flooding in here, but I'm just going to continue on the theme you ended with about getting the best deal, because that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? I mean, is that something you can elaborate a little bit more on? So how do you actually, just talk in a little bit more detail, how do you get the best deal once you've decided that you're actually going to make that decision and get in there, select a service provider for IT services, and get them to provide you with the services?
Yes, getting the best deal, whether one's a seller or a buyer, usually ends up in a negotiation course of some sort or another. So I imagine that many with us today will have been on negotiation courses, so I'm not going to go into that. I would say most of all, with good preparation here, the right relationship there, and understanding the kind of time scales, a lot of getting the best price is going to be to make sure that you're really only buying, depending what you ultimately want to achieve. The first thing is to be really clear about the cost of what you need versus the cost you would also like. Now, negotiating, of course, is the give and take. The most relevant part about getting the best deal from a supplier, of course, is in that negotiation and understanding the things that matter to us most and the things that matter to them most. Technology can be a mysterious world in the way that it gets priced. So the golden rule I would give anyone buying technology to get the price is first to understand the metrics and to understand the variables that the salesperson that you're dealing with has to work with. What are the component parts of the, they're not going to break down the cost model for you, but it is perfectly reasonable to insist on what the component parts are of the pricing model. So if I adjust this number here, what impact does that have? If I adjust this number there, what impact does it have? Now, salespeople, if they've been taught to negotiate well, will be taught to keep everything as a whole and make the component parts mysterious. As long as you have the right open relationship and you've established that right here, you can say, look, I've opened up to you. You want to get the best deal. I want to get the best deal. I need to understand the variables that you have to work with that will and won't affect me for me to be able to get the best deal for my business. And who knows, in the right situation, most of the time I've gone into a negotiation, I've gone in with a proposal and I know my buyer has come in with a clear idea of budget. And to begin with, the two are some way apart. By understanding the variables, pricing and need want from the buying side, and open, as far as one possibly can, open discussion, there will be a common point in the middle, which is the best deal. It might not be the cheapest deal, but it will be the best deal. And as I said earlier on, based on this relationship, it will be the best deal in the long term, because the relationship, the reliability, the trustworthiness of those vendors and suppliers, even if you pay a 10% premium in the short term, will pay back so many times in the long term, because you'll have bought goodwill. They won't be looking to try and clip you on every single change control return or anything like that. But as I say, right at the start, understand the variables and of the of the component parts of pricing. It's really important.
Excellent. So essentially what you're saying is, don't go in there asking for a percentage discount on the commercials. Understand what the component parts are in the first place. So you're coming from the kind of intelligent buyer perspective rather than asking for an arbitrary discount.
Yeah.
Careful what you wish for, as they say. Okay, so some more questions coming in. So I got one from Abdulrahman El Dabak, who is saying, what is the best approach to procure IT? Should we start with process and then people? Or should we look at, once we fix the process, we then proceed with buying the tech? Or do we do all three in parallel? What do you think?
Well, yes, I would love to tell you there's a natural order that you can go through it, but I'm afraid it's all together. So it's important, obviously, to have a procurement process, just as salespeople have their sales process. Go through those stages. But at each stage, and let's just take an ERP or a financial system purchase to begin with. In the early stage of your procurement process, it's going to be important to know who is going to be using it. It's important to know what they have now. It's going to be important ultimately to know what they are going to be asked to do with it, and involve them in your procurement process as early as possible. Get their input, because they're ultimately going to be, they are the ones who are going to be delivering this return on investment in their usage of the technology, right? Then there are the process elements of the ERP or the finance system or the HR system or whatever it might be. So with current technology, they will have their processes. Now, what you buy in your procurement process will be governed significantly by the processes and the information that you get out from the technology that you buy. So early in your procurement process, it's important to understand your ERP and finance processes, and the people on the ground who are operating these things, who've got a view of how rubbish it is today and how much better it could be if only. They are the people to talk to about those processes. And because they are people in ERP, in your finance function or your distribution, because they are people running processes today, they will probably have done their own research. They will have their own network, and they will have some ideas on some of the shortlist suppliers that you can use or you can go to right in the early stages of your procurement process, up in the early stages of your buying cycle. So this people process technology is something to bear in mind as you go through your stages of procuring technology. I hope that answers it.
No, it certainly does. It shows how important it is to mold the three together, but you have to have I guess what you're saying is you have to have an instinctive knowledge of the three areas. They're not separate.
Yeah.
You need to know your processes. You can't walk in and just buy an IT package off the shelf and ask for it to influence your own internal processes. So great answer.
I mean, you can buy technology off the shelf. Of course you can. I mean, you can go online and you can buy technology. Certainly in small to medium sized business world, you can download for finance. You can download Xero. You can download Sage. You can download QuickBooks. There's many packages that you can just buy online. But then we come back to people, process, technology. Just because you bought the technology doesn't anywhere remotely mean that the job is done, because to get value from it, which is the real game, you need to think about the processes and the people to make use of that technology.
Fantastic, James. Thanks for that. And I think the next piece, or the next kind of, I'll group a few questions together, but essentially, IT is this mysterious area, isn't it? It's the one category where the supplier have a certain amount of advantage over the buyer to a certain extent, because it's this mysterious area. But a couple of things. How do you make sure you're selecting a credible supplier, and how do you then engage with them on a partnership basis? How do you know that you're actually partnering with someone who has credibility in the long run?
Yeah, I think there are two answers. There are two fairly straightforward answers, I would say, that won't make any salespeople terribly happy, but they are the real answers. Mainly because it involves a whole load of work from salespeople. The first is do the research online. Now I know anyone can spin up a website, and one can make a website look really glossy, and pretty much you can say anything you like on it. But the world is full of social media. In the business world, of course, there is LinkedIn. It is absolutely not beyond the wit of anyone here, I am quite sure, to be able to find others who are not necessarily in your network now, but are in your network, in your virtual network on LinkedIn. Go to them. Just simply introduce yourself. You know, there are various searches that you can do on LinkedIn. If you haven't done them already, I fear I could be teaching a large number of people to suck eggs here, but I'll keep going anyway. Go to your LinkedIn connections, make new connections, and ask them. Ask them, particularly of any organizations that you might particularly admire. What do they use? How do they use it? We're looking to buy at the moment. Maybe not any of your competitors, but certainly others in a similar kind of area of business. That's certainly one way of doing it. When it comes to talking to these potential suppliers, I would say what you are looking for most of all are them to tell you the stories of what they have done with others, so that you can hear firsthand what aspirations they understood others wanted to achieve, what equivalent kind of situations they were in, what kind of problems they were facing, why they needed to do something, and then as a result of the relationship, the implementation, the project, what that project looked like, what the challenges, stresses, and strains. Every implementation project has problems. The success of a project obviously is the achievement of it, but as much of the success of an implementation project will come about with what went wrong and how did everyone pull together to fix it. Some of your best, most credible suppliers will open up and say, we had a problem here and here and here, and this is what we did to go about fixing those. And then this together is what we achieved with our client. If you listen out for that kind of language, that is credible language in itself. And then obviously ask those suppliers if you can talk to one or two of their customers. Now, they are only going to put you in touch with customers who are going to be who are at the very least reasonably happy, right? So, and they will have excellent relationships, and those customers of theirs will want to be giving them a good turn. So don't think you're going to get a warts and all picture from a proffered reference, but use LinkedIn. Make sure that you do your research with others on LinkedIn. Listen out for that kind of language, storytelling language of actually what happened in reality. Look out for people who say everything always goes right, because it never does in IT. It goes wrong frequently. We all know this. So hearing anybody who says it's all perfect, that's a warning sign in itself. If they offer that there's some challenges, then that's a good sign. And then talk to their customers wherever you can, and yeah, ask them some tough questions.
That's a good one, actually, getting your own recommendations. Some real gems there. Thanks, James. We'll go into the question from Faisal, who's asking, what are the key criteria we need to consider to ensure stakeholder buy-in during technology upgrades, especially the buy-in of decision makers? And he further goes on to say, how can we quantify and justify further investment on technology with decision makers?
Right. Yeah, I've been a bit of a student of decision makers over the last 35 years of doing this from the other side. And then I've had a turn, as I said, plenty of it, being a decision maker myself. I've come to a personal perspective that those who are asked to, on behalf of the company, and quite often in family businesses or in partnership business, with their own money, sign off investment of any sort, are primarily interested in 3 dimensions. And those dimensions are the money, the risk, and the time. I know that when I've been asked to sign things off, I'm not interested in the detail. But I will test from time to time that those who are putting the recommendation to me have gone into the detail. So I will dive straight into horrific amounts of detail here and there, but I'm not going to be asking to do a kind of complete micromanagement of, have you thought of this and have you thought of that, and have you thought, I'm not going to do their job for them. What I am going to focus on is the money. So how much is it going to cost? How much are we going to be paying, when, to whom? And the flip side of the money, where exactly are we going to get the return? In GE many years ago, there was the old thing where Jack Welch, apparently, if anybody went to him with a request for an investment that said, we're going to save this amount of time, he would say, okay, how many people is that? So this amount of time divided by the number of hours in the working day means that you're going to be getting rid of this many people, right? Okay, so you're going to make that many people, you're going to remove that many people from this area now, and then you are going to backfill with this investment that you're suggesting to me. Now that's he was well known for being particularly brutal, but that kind of thinking, many a business case, which is obviously important in the money side for stakeholders, ends up being saving time. Meaningless, absolutely meaningless. CFOs, CEOs, COOs want to know where they're spending less, not where they're saving time. They're already paying people. So saving time is just going to make life easier for the people who are doing this thing that the technology is going to be doing for them. I know this is really brutal, but this is the brutal reality. So for those signing checks, how is it actually going to save money? Or how will it save future expense? So it might be improving, optimizing a particular function, which otherwise during the course of growth would have to increase the number of people or increase investment in other areas. If you're saving that, that's a money return, and that's a good one. So that's the money bit. The risk bit it comes back to change, usually. So, oh my God, are things going to carry on working? We have to get this many pallets, units out per second, and you're talking about completely replacing this technology. Have you thought about that change? Are people going to be able to adopt this nice and easily? What does that change look like? How are you going to make sure the wheels stay on my business? Because if you rip one off, what you're asking me to do here is tip the whole car on its side, bunch of people to clamber out of a side window, take a wheel off, put another wheel on, and then put the car back on its 4 wheels as we carry on driving. But we haven't stopped driving. So make sure, please, that you go to the stakeholders with a clear understanding of this risk and this change, so that they're not fearful that the business is going to fall apart. And then there is the time. How long is this going to take? How long is this going to disrupt? And how long is it going to be before I get my money back and start making money as a consequence? So that graph that says, that has cost going up here, flattening off, and has return coming up, that crossover point, that tipping point, that break-even point. As a stakeholder, I always wanted to see when that was. And if that point is anywhere past, in most businesses, 3 years, forget it. Most of these days, people want it to be 1 year or even less. But those three things, I would say, focus on for those key stakeholders. But don't forget the other stakeholders, those poor souls who you're going to be putting new technology in front of, and their world is going to be turned upside down. Suddenly they were doing it all one way. Now they're doing it another way. They're stakeholders too, and don't forget them.
Great, thanks for that, James. I like the analogy in the middle as well. I think it really illustrates the point. Going on to a question from Susan. So getting a little bit technical here. So the question is, what about integration with other systems already available? And the example she's giving is a new ERP system integrating that with EMR, electronic medical records, or any other available process automation technologies. Do you have any tips to ensure that assumptions will actually work to avoid wasting time and effort at an early stage?
Right. So, yes, this term integrations gets bandied about a lot, and it covers a multitude of sins. Probably more than any other area, the devil is in a load of detail with integrations. And I would say get into that detail as early as you can bear to. Some people love it. I know where to go with the detail. I don't enjoy going there, but it has to be done. And the fundamentals are always pretty much the same. So the first fundamental is, of course, data in one system, data in the other, where one needs to move to another or the other way around. Exactly what is that data? What are those points of data? Next thing to understand is what format do we have here? What format do we have there? And this is true even if a supplier is saying, oh, we've got APIs. APIs is not an answer. It's just the beginning of an answer. So, because APIs is not a magic silver bullet, of course. APIs is merely application program interchange is what I've always, or integration. It is merely a protocol, not always universal, between two different systems. But the first point is what data is going to be moving from where to where. The next is going to be, in that movement, how does it need to be transformed? So if it's in this format here, how does it get to be that format there between these two systems? Then there is the transport of that data. So it's here, it gets transformed. How does it move over to this other system? That is usually where API conversation comes into play. And then, so there is the medium that is used. Sometimes it will be, it'll use APIs for electronic exchange. Sometimes it won't be a real-time exchange. It will be effectively a file download, file upload, using something called SFTP, usually Secure File Transfer Protocol. So be clear about what the transport is. And then the other element is the frequency. Is it absolute real time? Is it any time this piece of data changes, it needs to real time be reflected there? Or is it gathering together a number of situations? So your integration, checking, polling from time to time, and then only when, only occasionally does it get moved over? Or is it something that many, many moons ago, many of you may not even have come across the term batch, but when I started all of this, there were things called batch updates, and blocks of data were moved out and then uploaded into the other system in a block or in a batch. So those are the things: the data, what formats do you have, how does it need to be transformed, how often does it need to move, how will it move? Those are the key questions to ask. And when you challenge your suppliers with those questions, in order to understand the credibility of their ability to provide an integration, if they're good, they'll know, they'll be able to explain it, and they'll be able to explain it in simple language.
That's great. So essentially get in there early and you'll be able to test their credibility in successfully integrating with your system, right?
Yeah. And take nothing for granted.
And I think that goes without saying. Thanks for that. Moving on to a question from Shiju. Going back to basics, could you suggest some tips for negotiating IT security systems, as prices seem to be artificially hiked due to the threat perceptions?
Well, we get into the laws of supply and demand. I think, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on IT security systems, but any piece of technology, come to that, anything in the world. We're in a situation in the UK lately where everybody has been terribly afraid of going overseas and catching COVID. So everybody's been doing this staycation. What a surprise. The market has therefore resulted in a load of holiday homelets being hiked in price. It's supply and demand. Is there anything that can be done in the short term about that? No, because frankly, the price will self-level. Where there is a perception of significant risk, the value goes up and therefore the price will go up. And that, I'm afraid, is an economic universal. What you can do about it, however, is, I would suggest, to help the vendors that you're talking to understand that this may not always be the case. This is for now, and sure, they could make hay while the sun shines, but it could well go cloudy later on. And what are they going to do then? This might need to be a slightly more senior conversation in the business, because I would say most of the time the salesperson won't care a great deal about prices in 2-3 years' time, unless their commission plan has something that accommodates that. They're just going to be interested in how they can hit the quota and get their commission, like right now, this year, this quarter, this month, whatever it might be. So in order to offset the immediate this immediate shift in favor of the seller, you open up a conversation with more senior people who are interested in the longer term relationship that will weather them through times when it ain't quite so sunny. So you are literally selling the future risk to them of it ain't being so sunny to offset the very sunny day that they're in right now, which, as far as you're concerned, looks a bit gloomy price-wise. And you create this balance over the course of whatever period of time you feel able to commit to, and say, well, let's consider what it's like normally, going to be like normally, and thereby reduce your price today.
Great. So you're in effect holding the carrot of a longer term relationship, which is then commercially viable for both parties. Great. Thanks for that, James. An interesting one. Let's go back another kind of technical question. And the question is, how can we compare between open digital architecture and a partnership approach?
Got me there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the comparative points are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally articulating the question as it is. So I suppose, and I guess we can go back to Abdulrahman if he's still around, but
Okay.
Comparison between open digital architecture as a solution and the alternative, if there is one.
Yeah, I would suggest we take that offline. I think I need to understand some more of uh, what is being referred to in, yeah, this
Great.
comparison point in relation to procurement. I'm sorry,
Okay.
it doesn't really strike me. I can't
So we'll put that
pinpoint
back out
it.
to Abdurrahman, who gave us the question. Can you just articulate your question again, and we'll give it back to James, and we'll move on. In the meanwhile, so an interesting question came out to say, how do we do a benchmark or comparison between IT suppliers?
Well, yes, there are there are a number of objectives in achieving a benchmark, of course. But it kind of depends on which benchmark we're talking about. There are a load of different organizations that one can find online to get comparative points on price. There are independent organizations who that one can go to. They specialize, of course, according to different categories of technology, and they will continually research feature, function, price, number of customers, and so on and so forth. Each category will have its own specialist firm. I happen to know that across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, there's an organization called Fosway who are absolutely superb to help people benchmark suppliers in the world of human capital management, HR systems, talent, learning, and all of that kind of stuff. There are then other organizations, Alpha and a number of others, do that in relation to ERP and many other categories of technology. But it's very much a category specific thing. And so I would suggest that if you are first thinking to look to do that, understand who those third-party advisories are that relate to the category that you're looking at, and go to them, because they will effectively have done an enormous amount of the work for you. You will have to pay for the service. The other way to do it, of course, will be to try and do it yourself, but you're in for a lot of research work that way. And of course, you would need to start by ensuring that you're clear on what comparative points you want between the different suppliers.
Great. And now we're going to go to we're going to bring Abdurrahman in because he had the question. So Abdurrahman, over to you. Do you want to articulate your point?
Okay. Hi. Hi, James. Thank you very much for your for this valuable information. My question is about open digital architecture. Is about ODA makes us owner or provider independent, but we are trying to in procurement, procuring IT, making a partnership, and this should be comparing with the long-term commitment with a single provider, but the ODA is trying to be provider independent, to be choose which is the best module for us, maybe when we talk about the BSS or OSS or something like that.
Right. Okay. I think I get it now. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, of course, the objective of open digital architecture, and I'll be interested to see if it's your objective as well, but the one I'm familiar with is that one has a lot more flexibility to be able to plug in the latest tech, plug out the latest, oldest tech. You can exchange and move in a more agile way. Is that the way you're thinking about it?
Yeah. Go ahead, Abdurrahman.
Exactly.
Okay. Yes, and that I understand now. So that apparently contradicts the idea of forming these kind of relationships with partners. Part of part of the conversation here, I would suggest, in the early stages of discussion with vendors is for you to gain an assessment of the extent of their roadmap effectively. So the extent to which their technology today will be updated, will be improved, will be enhanced in line with maintaining, well, both open standards and obtaining the best available technology at any particular point that you want it to slot into your open digital architecture. I think there's a distinction that needs to be made between the technology and the relationship as it relates to the time, because there are going to be some elements of your ODA which might be very short term, they may be very component. Where honestly, they don't necessarily need a long-term relationship. These long-term relationships relate to the significant portions of your infrastructure that are honestly not going to be in your interest to change very often, because it would require too much change by way of process and people. Because balanced up, ODA is very much something in the pure technology part. Don't forget that each time you change the technology, you've got to change processes, and that's change for people. So the bigger the piece of technology, the more process there's going to be to change, the more change there is for people. And in that thinking, the more important it is that you have a stronger partnership, longer term partnership. So as the frequency of change in ODA drops, the importance of partnership with your vendors will drop as well.
Does that answer your question, Abdurrahman?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's clear now.
Pleasure.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, James. I think we managed to get to the bottom of that. Thanks very much. And look, I'm looking at the time, so I will go to one more question that we had. We do have a load, so I think if anyone, for the remaining questions, we will communicate with the people who ask those questions outside of this session. But the last one I'll go to is this one, interesting one actually. How can we manage stakeholders when they are inclined towards one specific vendor, i.e. when someone is looking at SAP or Oracle and they just want to buy that, or SAP is offering more than Oracle, but the Oracle cost is lower than SAP. So that's a specific quote from the person who asked the question. So a little bit controversial, but that's why I'm giving it over to you, James. Go ahead.
Yes, fabulous question. Love it. Yeah, and executives are absolute terrors at this. There's the old expression, which is a small amount of information is a dangerous thing, right? And especially if you're buying something as big as an Oracle, an SAP, a Salesforce, a Workday, whatever it might, a ServiceNow, whatever it might be, particularly in the enterprise space. So yeah. The truth is, I would suggest what we're talking about is I guess only a problem if they disagree with what you honestly believe is the better answer. If they agree, then you've got a natural flow to the river, and you can all get on the boat and float downstream nice and comfortably. It's only going to be because they've used it somewhere else before and it seemed fine. They know somebody there is often another big one. I know somebody, I can get a great deal. That's another popular one. Doesn't usually happen, to be honest. Really, there's quite a lot of executive ego we can bump up against in this situation. So the answer fundamentally will lie in your own quality of doing the due diligence. And that's exactly why I was talking about this here. So I would recommend early interviews of all of those involved, again, use aspirin. What are your aspirations from this? What situation do you think we're in? What problems do you think we have? What risks do you think there are to the business now? What rewards do you think we could get? And what, from your perspective, Mr., Mrs., Miss, Ms., whatever, what implications do you think there are for not doing this? So this is doing an aspirin on your own executives to establish their start point right at the very beginning. They're going to be involved later on. Do it right at the very beginning. Then go through the detailed analysis that you need to, what the real situations are on the ground, what the real problems are on the ground, what the real risks are on the ground. And then there is something that I'm very happy to share with everybody. It's a technique that I coach clients with, which is joining the dots a bit later on, where we can go back to these executives and say, right, love your perspective, great perspective, thank you for your time. This is what you said. This is the actual situation. These are the actual problems that can be fixed with technology. These are then the rewards that we get fixed from the technology. And this is why Oracle, SAP, insert vendor, this is why our recommendation is this one, and it's not that one, and it's not that one. What from that do you disagree with? Because if an executive thinks they're going to argue against the due diligence that you've done on the ground, then it's all on them, and they haven't done the detailed work. So if they decide, I mean, ultimately it's their money, right? So yeah, they do have the decision. But if they decide for an SAP rather than you deciding for an Oracle or a Microsoft or anybody else, please insert other supplier names. I want to maintain my independence here. Then going back to what I said earlier on, they are concerned with money, risk, and time. If they literally go against your recommendation from you having done and shown them the due diligence that you've done to come up with your recommendation, which is impartial, then the risk of the decision is all on them. And I don't know many stakeholders who are going to be feeling very comfortable about going ahead regardless. What will usually happen in that situation is they'll then try to persuade you that black is white, green is purple, and pink is orange. Hold your ground. Hold your ground. Which bit of this due diligence did we miss? What perspective did we not take into account? Because I asked you at the beginning and you told me. I've gone around everybody in the business who is directly involved in this. And we are in accord that the best partnership, the best deal, and the best thing for the business, consensus is X. They may still disagree, but then it's all on them. And ultimately, whilst that would be enormously frustrating, and I have been in plenty of situations like this, and you can end up kind of paying a price thinking, it's not what I recommended. But you then have that recourse, which is, it's hard. This is why we didn't recommend it. It was all on you. But you then have the means to hold their feet to the fire for what you believe is the wrong decision. But in the meantime, yeah, use the due diligence to try and persuade them out of going down a route that you honestly believe is the wrong one.
Great, and that's a great question to end on, actually. And James, thank you for joining us. Thank you for attacking a complex subject, but a topical one. Thanks for being with us today. It's been a great session. Thank you to you all for joining us. Look out for the next CIPS MENA webinar series as well. James Bennett from iServe. It's been a great session. Look forward to seeing you again. All the best. Take care.
Thank you all.